All right, so here's where we left off with viruses. Now we're going to talk about viral morphology. Morphology means shape. So we already saw some shapes of some viruses in that previous picture. One of the more common viral shapes are called helical. So a helical shape or a helical structure, which is basically some sort of spiraling or twisted rod-shaped kind of thing. They can be enveloped or non-enveloped, and it includes things like the rabies virus, the Ebola virus, and the influenza virus. They all have helical structures associated with them. Then we have something called an icosahedron or polyhedral morphology. An icosahedron is a geometrical shape with 20 faces and 12 corners. The best way to think about an icosahedron shape is just think about a soccer ball. You know how a soccer ball has like different kind of facets and edges to it, and it gives it kind of that characteristic shape. That's basically what we're talking about. It's just a microscopic version of that shape. Again, icosahedral viruses can be enveloped or non-enveloped. It just depends on which virus you're talking about. And it includes things like the adenoviruses, the poliovirus, and herpes viruses. And then finally, we just kind of lump a lot of them into a category of complex, because there's a lot of viruses that have very complex morphologies. It could be a combination of helical and icosahedron, as well as other possibilities. So now I'm just going to show you a bunch of pictures of different viruses up close. You won't be, labeling or identifying any of these pictures on the test. It's just to give you an idea about what some viruses look like. The first one here, a helical virus. The example there on the right is the Ebola virus. But again, they can take all kinds of weird shapes and forms. And basically, it can be very simple. It can be, a little bit more complex. But you have the DNA or RNA, and then you have the capsid, kind of surrounding it. Then we have the influenza virus, which is an enveloped helical virus. So you can see the nucleic acid is there in purple, and then it kind of the virus kind of surrounds it like that, and then you have the envelope, and then you have all these spikes, and these spikes are very, very important. The spikes are what give the influenza virus the ability to infect our cells, and the spikes are also what we use to identify the different strains of the flu. So the flu could be, H1N1, it could be H2N1, it could be H2N2. Those names come from the different spikes that are found on the outside of the envelope. Then we have an adenovirus, which has a polyhedral shape to it. So you can kind of sort of see how this almost looks like kind of like a soccer ball. It has like those different kind of faces to it. And again, adenoviruses, usually not too much of a concern for humans, but they can cause respiratory issues in dogs and cats. Here's another picture of another type of adenovirus. This one, the adenovirus has these little spikes on here. And again, you can see how it kind of looks like a soccer ball. The T4 bacteriophage is really crazy looking. So this one would definitely have a complex morphology. You can see the top of it has a kind of a icosahedron type shape, and then it has this tail, and then it has these little tail fibers that basically act as little hooks. And the T4 bacteriophage acts very much like a hypodermic needle, where it attaches to its host with these little tail fibers, and then it injects the DNA directly into the host cell that it's trying to infect. Now, luckily, since this is a bacteriophage, bacteriophages or bacteriophages, you can pronounce it either way. Sometimes people just call them a phage, but I'm like, I don't know. I just prefer the term bacteriophage over the term phage. but it is a virus that only infects bacteria. So luckily, these viruses will not come after us at all, which is great because I do not want that thing coming after me. So where did viruses come from? Well, it's a really good question, and it's also probably a question that'll never be answered. So one kind of theory, kind of the going theory, is that viruses are, they were, a billion years ago or so, they were a section of a cell that kind of became independent, became motile. So there's different little portions of cells that actually contain their own genetic material. Um, we don't talk about transposons at all, so you would only know about those if you took like a higher level kind of a biology or cell biology course. Plasmids certainly have been mentioned up to this point. And then, sometimes even something like the mitochondria, because the mitochondria contains its own DNA. So the going theory is that, millions and millions of years ago, these little sections of cells kind of exited the cell and kind of became its own little thing and became the first virus. Another theory says that they evolved independently from cells. So they actually developed or evolved before cells actually evolved, because viruses are, for the most part, smaller and less complex than cells actually are. Cells are much more organized. They have a lot more kind of going on with them. The problem, of course, with this theory is it's almost like the chicken, what came first, the chicken or the egg kind of thing, because viruses require cells in order to continue to go on, producing more viruses, because viruses are cellular hijackers. So how could viruses come before cells if they need cells in order to, quote unquote, live their lives? So, there's definitely an issue with this theory as well. And then probably my favorite is that they're aliens from outer space. Now you might kind of be like, what? Kind of laugh at this at first. But no, like it could very well have been, again, millions and millions of years ago, there could have been like some asteroids that crashed into the Earth that had viruses on them. So like maybe viruses aren't even technically from Earth. Maybe they didn't originate on Earth. Maybe they came from outer space. They crashed on Earth millions and millions of years ago, and then they decided, all right, well, here I am on Earth now, and there's all these little kind of cells everywhere. Let me go after those cells and use those cells for my own kind of means. This is a legitimate theory. Okay, it's not like a joke. Okay, it's not like anything like that. It's a legitimate theory about the origin of viruses. And the problem with this one is, viruses kind of use the same chemicals, they use the same proteins, they use DNA or RNA. There are some slight differences from the genetic code. You should have learned the genetic code in A&P1, where you had like this little chart and it had all those A's and U's and G's and C's on it, and then you have to do like translation from the codon to the amino acid, right? Now, every living thing on Earth uses that exact same genetic code, whether it's bacteria, whether it's a human, whether it's an apple tree, whether it's a dolphin, everybody uses that same code, except some viruses actually do not obey that genetic code. They have different codons that code for different amino acids. So that's kind of weird, okay? But they still use the same amino acids. They still use the same, A, U, G, C in their RNA. So, who knows? We'll probably never know. It's just one of those things. So viral taxonomy is very challenging. Trying to put viruses into the whole, King Philip came over for good spaghetti theme, the kingdom, phylum, class, order, family, genus, species. It really doesn't work too well. They just don't fit you could almost have like kingdom virus, okay, and that could kind of work, or I guess domain. It would be domain virus, kingdom virus, okay. And then after that, it just gets really challenging because they're so unique, they're so different that they have very little in common with other things on Earth. Even some viruses have little in common with other viruses, so it's very hard to do. So viruses, once again, we classify viruses based off of things we've already talked about in this PowerPoint, based off of the host range, based off of whether it's RNA or DNA, and based off of its shape. And that's kind of the best we can do. So it is what it is. Now, sometimes you'll see, sometimes they try to give viruses like a scientific name. They'll try to, they'll say, oh, this virus, genus or this virus species, but it just does not work very well, unfortunately. So again, a bacteriophage is a virus that infects bacteria. They are the most studied type of virus, so we know the most about these types of viruses. And again, it's because of safety, right? Like if somebody gave you the choice, oh, do you want to work with this bacteria that has 0 chance of infecting you versus do you want to work with this bacteria that could potentially make you sick? Well, I'm going to pick the one that can't do anything to me. I'm going to pick the one that's the safest, 0 chance of making me sick in any kind of way. That's the one I'm going to study, right? So, of course, the safest viruses for humans are the ones that are the most studied. A really, really cool thing that, once again, is under, research and different things are being developed and everything, is bacteriophages used to be used as sort of a treatment for bacterial infections. Because, again, you're talking about a virus that will infect and kill bacteria. So if you have a patient who is sick with a bacterial infection, right? And again, this is like, in the early 1900s, before antibiotics, right? And they're like, all right, well, we have this thing that we know somehow is going to get inside a bacteria and kill it. We don't exactly know all of it because, again, it's like the early 1900s. And yeah, that was a thing that was kind of being developed a little bit. And then antibiotics came along and everybody was like, well, forget this stuff because antibiotics, they're like, they work like magic. They're a total miracle, right? But now that we have antibiotic resistance, where the researchers and the doctors and scientists, they're kind of going way back to things from 100 years ago, and they're like, all right, well, what were they doing to try to combat bacteria before antibiotics? Because we kind of need to study that stuff again because of antibiotic resistance. So definitely, an up-and-coming kind of area of research and development when it comes to treating and curing diseases, which, of course, is our main focus in our class. All right, so the lytic cycle of viruses is essentially like their life cycle. So the word virulent, you can see the word virus there, right? So virulent means something that is dangerous, something that can hurt you, right? So like the word virulent can actually be used to describe bacterial diseases, which is weird, but it's just kind of where the word came from. But only viruses that are dangerous, which is the vast majority of viruses, have a lytic cycle. These are the 5 steps of the lytic cycle. You definitely need to know these steps in the right order, okay? Attachment, penetration, biosynthesis, maturation, and release, okay? So I'm just about out of time, so I have to stop the video here, but we will pick right up with the lytic cycle. We're going to talk about what happens in each of these 5 stages, but you definitely want to make sure you know the stages in the correct order. It's like a step 1, step 2, step 3 kind of a thing.